This is Bloomberg Crypto, a daily Bloomberg iHeart podcast, and I'm Stacey Marie Ishmael, managing editor of crypto for Bloomberg News. It's Monday, February 13th. If you've heard the name Winklevoss, it's likely that you've watched the movie The Social Network. That film featured a memorable depiction of the Harvard twins and Olympic rowers who sued Mark Zuckerberg for allegedly stealing their idea for a social network. Or you might know that Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss set up a crypto exchange called Gemini, which is currently involved in a very ugly and very public dispute with the folks over at Genesis. Both Genesis and Gemini, we know, so many G names, are facing serious allegations from US regulators about their products and services. Or perhaps you're familiar with their cover band, Mars Junction. Tyler's the lead singer, Cameron jams on guitar. The twins certainly lead a very interesting life, one enabled by their billions of dollars. That wealth comes in part from their early adoption of digital assets like Bitcoin. When they settled out of court with Mark Zuckerberg all those years ago for around $65 million, they put some of those assets into crypto. Here to break down what's up with the Winklevoss twins and their presence in digital assets is Bloomberg reporter Olga Karif. Olga, welcome back to the show.
Great to be back. Thank you.
Let's talk about some twins, specifically the Winklevoss twins, or as many of us like to call them, the Winklevi. What's going on with them? Why are we talking about them today?
So we are talking about them today because there are about 340,000 people who are very unhappy with them. So these are people who used the brothers' Gemini exchange for their crypto, and then they decided to also use the so-called Earn program that Gemini offered. Basically, the way this program worked was, if you have crypto and you want to earn yield on it, you put it into Earn, and your crypto is being lent out through Genesis, which is a partner of Gemini, and you can earn up to, around 8% yield.
Which is high, which is what was attractive about this product?
Yeah, way higher than you could earn at a bank, except, of course, at a bank, your deposits are insured. And as all of the Gemini Earn customers know now, obviously whatever you put into Earn is not insured. Mm-hmm. And of course, Gemini has said this up front, but many people don't read terms of service.
Well, okay, so Gemini was offering this interesting product. It was providing, yields or returns that were unavailable to other folks. How did they get into trouble, though? How did they end up with having hundreds of thousands of people being mad at them?
So the trouble really started with Genesis, their partner. So over the summer, Genesis basically couldn't collect a loan it gave to another crypto firm that went under called Three Arrows. It was a hedge fund. And, essentially Genesis's financial trouble started right there. And in November, Genesis halted withdrawals. And that meant that if you're in the Earn program, you cannot withdraw your money. And essentially, the Winklevoss brothers have been working with Genesis on some sort of a resolution.
Now remember, the Winklevoss brothers have been waging a public fight against Genesis, even calling for Barry Silbert, the founder of the digital currency group Empire, to step down as its CEO. As Genesis is lending business.
So we've got this situation, and we've talked about on the show a couple of times, where even if one entity is quote unquote fine, the real risk for a lot of consumers is what's called a counterparty, right? It's who that entity is also doing business with and what kinds of stresses and risks that they're exposed to. A lot of Gemini's arguments, including in the UK, were that they were better than other folks at, managing their risk, at making sure that even if they had those exposures, they were at relatively, shall we say, not stressful levels.
As Genesis's lending business entered bankruptcy, Gemini has been listed as its largest outside creditor, with the most money owed by a landslide.
What went wrong?
And it's a great point that people thought about Gemini differently than about a lot of other companies. So ever since the brothers started the exchange in 2014, they've been all about, following regulation and being super conservative. Most other exchanges would list tons of, tokens, and this exchange wouldn't list a ton just because they wanted to be super conservative and super compliant. And so people kind of thought about them in this way even after Gemini launched Earn in early 2021. And at the time, the brothers said that, essentially they're checking up on their partner, they're checking up Genesis's financials from time to time. So people had a lot more faith in what Gemini was doing with Earn, even as a lot of other yield programs collapsed last year.
Now, one of the bits of reporting that you had in the profile that you wrote of, the Winklevoss twins and what they've been dealing with is that they have a cover band.
Absolutely. It's called Mars Junction. And essentially, they actually went on tour last summer as a lot of this troubles in crypto just first started appearing and boiling to the surface.
Why are people mad about this? Do they hate music?
So no, I think just a lot of people are wondering why they went on tour when things were going south in crypto. At the time when they went on tour, Three Arrows, the hedge fund that ultimately led to troubles at Genesis, was collapsing, and Celsius was on the brink of bankruptcy. And, this domino started falling, and we, only months later can see just how interconnected all the different parts of the crypto ecosystem are. All these companies, lent and borrowed from each other and did business with each other. And, there's hardly anybody in the crypto industry that hasn't been impacted in some way by what happened.
Now, I feel like over the past couple of weeks of episodes, I have to talk about the Securities and Exchange Commission like every single time because they're like, hi, we're here too. So what is the SEC up to as it relates to this Genesis Gemini situation? Why are they also involved?
Sure. So the SEC essentially filed a lawsuit against Genesis and Gemini, accusing them of basically running this Earn program, even though, in their opinion, it's equivalent to offering unregistered securities. So you have regulators as part of the mix as well, which I'm sure complicates any sort of settlement and discussions that are happening.
Why, over the past several months, do you think we have seen so much more of this kind of SEC litigation? Because, if we go back to, let's say, 2020, early 2021, the rhetoric was much different. There was this kind of excitement and enthusiasm because folks were like, oh, Gary Gensler, he taught a blockchain class, like he's down for the cause. And now they're like, oh, Gary Gensler, why is he coming for us? Like what happened to, have this shift of the SEC from like, we're keeping an eye on things to, and now we're coming after you?
Gary Gensler is under a lot of pressure as well. He is facing a lot of criticism because he was pursuing Kim Kardashian with his enforcement actions, while, a lot of this bad stuff that is affecting thousands or hundreds of thousands of people has been happening. And the SEC has done nothing until sort of everybody was already in bankruptcy, if you will, right? Or nearing bankruptcy. And so Gary Gensler is facing a lot of criticism of, like, where were you? And why didn't you go after these guys earlier while, they weren't in such trouble, and maybe the users could have gotten some more of their money back?
Up next, more from Bloomberg reporter Olga Karif on what's happening with the Winklevoss twins. We'll be right back. In the Bloomberg ecosystem, our colleague on Bloomberg Opinion, Aaron Brown, made the argument that the Winklevoss twins' reputation has been severely tarnished. This idea that they were like the literal golden boys of crypto seems to be fading a little bit. Do you think that the Winklevosses have a tarnished reputation, quote unquote?
So I'm of two minds here. On the one hand, Gemini says it worked with regulators. It ran its earned product by them, and they didn't say anything against it. And of course, we know that Coinbase tried to launch a similar product, and it was directly told by regulators that if you launch it, we'll sue.
Yeah.
And so they had to back off. Very clear. So on the one hand, you would think that once Gemini saw the Coinbase action, maybe it should have reconsidered or done something. On the other hand, if what they say is true and they initially got a green light from their regulators, then they could also feel like we haven't done anything wrong. I think part of what needs to happen is a re-examination of regulators' role and actions and whether they were asleep at the wheel, whether they did all they were supposed to. And overall, I think Gemini still continues to have a much better reputation than a lot of other overseas exchanges. And the Winklevoss twins are obviously accomplished and known people who are trying to comply with U.S. law, as they have repeatedly said. So, but I also, at the same time, there are a lot of posts on Reddit and other social networks essentially saying, I used to be a loyal Gemini customer and I've left. I am fed up with this. I lost money on Earn, not coming back. And in fact, if we look at statistics, Gemini lost quite a bit of market share over the last year. So I think there's definitely been damage done. At the same time, this is part of a problem that has impacted the entire industry.
The Winklevi have had to play this very delicately. These two different things where we're like, we wear polo shirts, but we also shred a mean guitar. And, it seems like kind of emblematic of what they were trying to do with Gemini, right? Like offer these attractive, slightly risky yields, but also benefit from the perception that they were one of the safer places to be. How possible is this going to be in the future in this regulatory environment?
I think with regulators really kind of tightening their grip on this sector, like you said, it all goes to this trade-off between risk and yield. And I think what we might see is that as regulations tighten, the ability to sort of speculate and earn crazy double or triple digit yields here might decline. I'm not sure it will go away completely, but it might decline. But maybe it's a good thing from the standpoint of investor protection and so forth. But in terms of where Gemini and the Winklevoss brothers go from here, I think it still remains to be seen. They both sort of insist that they're not going anywhere. They're very strong believers in the sector. A couple of years ago, Tyler Winklevoss wrote this big essay saying, according to his estimates, he believes that Bitcoin will reach, 500,000.
We think at a $10 trillion market cap, we think one Bitcoin will be worth $500,000. And we think that could happen inside this decade, definitely the next 5 years. So we're hodlers at least until...
They're not just saying that. They completely believe that this will be achieved. And I sort of tend to be of the mind that, yes, people's memories are short. And if we enter another bull market, their business will recover.
And just as a last question on that point about them sticking around, one of the things that you've mentioned is the fact that the brothers have a lot of their own personal wealth, right? Partly from investing in Bitcoin very, very early. Have they made any suggestions towards saying that they would personally make any of the investors in the Earn product whole, or are they kind of separating them as individuals from Gemini as entity?
So there has been no suggestion that they would use their personal wealth to bail anybody out. So each brother has about 3.2 billion in personal wealth at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of investors, even investors in Gemini, who, the latest round Gemini raised was in late 2021. They raised 400 million at valuation of 7 billion for the Gemini exchange. A lot of investors in Gemini even believe that, if something goes wrong, the brothers will backstop the exchange because they own about 70% of it. But whether they would backstop Earn users, I don't think that's clear at all. They haven't said anything like this, and I think it's very unlikely because they're not outright required to bail anybody out. And while I think there might be some legal arguments saying they have to make their users whole, this would have to go through a legal process, most likely, before we know whether that's the case or not.
Well, Olga, as we say, it's never a dull moment. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
That was Bloomberg reporter Olga Karif. You can find more of her reporting on the Bloomberg Terminal and on Bloomberg.com. And be sure to check out our twice-weekly newsletter, Bloomberg Crypto. This is Bloomberg Crypto, a daily podcast from Bloomberg and iHeartRadio. For more shows from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Send us your comments, questions, or suggestions for the show to crypto@bloomberg.net. The supervising producer of Bloomberg Crypto is Vicky Vergolina. Our senior producer is Janet Babin. Our producers are Mohammed Farouk and Sharon Barrero. Our associate producers are Ty Butler and Moses Undum. Desta Wonderad is our engineer. Original music by Leo Sidran. I'm Stacey Marie Ishmael. We'll be back tomorrow.